The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Glass's monthly webinar. Thanks for coming along. And if you have any questions whilst we're running through this today, and you'd like to ask me, just use the text functionality and send that through to me, and I'll try and answer the questions towards the end of the webinar. Thanks. Okay, the data that I'm going to present today is based on the most up-to-date data we have, both from the retail and from the wholesale markets, together with some news that came out yesterday from the government. Obviously, with the coronavirus pandemic moving quite quickly, things may change over the next few months, but certainly the data is relevant for today, October the 13th, 2020. So today's agenda. What I'm going to talk about is first the coronavirus and what's happening with the UK economy. We'll very, very briefly look at Brexit. We'll look at the 2020 market realities and what data we have for, like I said, the retail and the wholesale markets. We'll look at residual values and how they've been made up and how we work with residual values. That's answering a question that I had last month from one of the attendees. I'll summarize and then we'll look at next steps. So really, yesterday, Boris was stood in front of Parliament along with Keir, and they talked about the three-tier system that's going to affect the UK market. Now, just in a very quick look at what it really means, is that the three-tier has been introduced. The government doesn't believe a second national lockdown at the moment is necessary, and really they'd like to steer clear of that if we possibly can, particularly with the damage to the economy and to children who would miss out on going to school. So the tier system that's been introduced is in three tiers: medium, high, and very high. Left out the low. So the medium level looks at current national measures, the curfew for pubs and clubs, and the rule of six. And it also looks at that's implemented for fewer than 100 cases per 100,000 population. The high prevents social mixing between households, rule 6 outdoors. And here you can't go to the pub and meet mates, and that's above cases sort of above 100 per 100,000 population. And the very high, which is affecting quite a few cities now, I think Nottingham is going into this. It's a baseline, prohibits social mixing indoors. It will close bars, pubs and clubs, and that's at significantly higher rates of transmission. Now, from what I can see currently, is that it doesn't really affect what we do in automotive. The OEMs will continue to work, dealers will continue to sell, auctions will continue to be open, albeit online still, and finance companies will continue to finance cars. So from what we're looking at, we have to assume that we'll continue working as normal, which is great news. And it means the market, certainly the way we're looking at it, will stay reasonably positive as we move out of the worst part of the lockdown that we had through March, April, and May. What we're looking at through some figures we've got from GfK is that the consumer confidence is slowly edging up, but we've still got some woes in there, some real sort of confidence issues that's affecting retail across retail. This isn't necessarily just in automotive. We're having improved slightly in September despite increasing COVID-19 infections, and I think this will continue to improve as we move forward because people are starting to understand how to live with this pandemic, how they can socially distance and how they can continue to work normally. However, it does remain at pretty depressed levels, and the confidence barometer from GfK suggests that it's climbed to about -25 in September. It's an increase in 2 points compared to August, which was at -27. But if we look at some comparator levels, which was -12 in September 2019, and it had risen quite nicely in February to just -7. But of course, it's much higher than we were in June, which was at -36. So there have been significant improvements, which is great news for us in automotive. Now, I've just got one slide on Brexit. This is it. It's pretty much the same as last month when we talked about it, but major difficulties remain. The likelihood of a no-deal Brexit is looming large. The European Union are considering this and perhaps readying themselves for what this could mean. So at the moment, there seems to be pretty much a deadlock between the UK and Europe. So hopefully there will be more movement on this, but obviously coronavirus has taken precedence, and that's the way it's playing out at the moment. But we will keep watching this issue as we move forward, and we'll try and understand it more as we go into the next few months towards the deadline at the end of December. So looking at the market realities for this year, we take into account a number of data points, but if we first look at the data from the SMMT, so new car registrations. In September for car, they were 4.4% lower than previous year. However, this isn't all it necessarily seems. So manufacturers and dealers were having problems in terms of getting cars to customers and actually getting cars from the factory. So actually overall, it's pretty positive. Yes, it wasn't quite as big as last year, but overall it leaves us just a third down on last year. That's 33% down on last year. And when we look at the numbers for year to date, we're up to 1.2 million. H1 was 600,000, 600,500. So effectively in just 3 months, we've managed to see registrations double, which is an amazing big good news, really. The rate of improvement has been significant. What we will know by the end of this year, and we effectively know now, is that OEM's expectations have been reduced drastically for 2020. And this will continue into 2021. What it also means is that as the new manufacturers launch new vehicles, perhaps the pressure to get those out into multiple different and perhaps more difficult and more expensive sales channels will reduce. We've already seen in the new car market the rapid decrease in the amount of rental vehicles that are being sold. So it's quite important as we move forward, but that perhaps that stays low because there isn't the demand for those rental vehicles. People aren't holidaying in the same way. People aren't using airports in the same way, which is where the majority of rental vehicles are picked up from. There's very large changes for the rental market for cars, because for LCVs, it's perhaps a different story. September saw registrations of LCVs actually 26.4% higher than 2019, albeit 2019 was a relatively small year. I would say that's a really good result for the market. Because of the amount of vehicles that are currently in stock and the way the logistics were working for LCVs, the dealers did an amazing job of getting more vehicles out there than the previous year. Now, they still, although slightly better than the car market, this still leaves the LCV market 27.2% behind 2019. Now, again, we've seen a significant amount of vehicles sold in the last 3 months, around 100,000 for LCVs. Now, as I said before, the LCV rental market is very different at the moment. We're seeing rental vehicles bolstering fleets across the larger fleets. And with that, I'm talking about the likes of Ocado, Waitrose to You, and a lot of the delivery companies that will be using LCVs to deliver. Usually their demand has peaked. It's much higher than that they predicted for this year, right at the start of this year, and they've taken on rental vehicles to supplement their current fleets. Now, those vehicles may turn into new registrations next year as they continue to battle against the higher demand that they're seeing for their services. But this is across the piece, and it's also affecting the used vehicle market for LCVs, because the supply of LCVs has really decreased. So a lot of LCV users are really looking around right now to supplement what they've got. And I'll talk about that a little bit more when we look at the wholesale market. If we look at for cars, just to see where the fuel types that is going at the moment, I think this is also quite interesting. We'd already started to see the decline of diesel and pure diesel in the market before COVID. Right now it's starting to accelerate. Yes, the registration figures are slightly lower, but we're seeing a real shift in where the registrations are going. So those new registrations, they're looking at battery electric vehicles and hybrids. Now, and when I talk about hybrids, I mean the pure hybrids. There's been significant increases in market share for those vehicles. Now, what I'm starting to do is to look at diesel, which would include the mild hybrids, and petrol. They also, my volume figures here also include mild hybrids. I'm doing that because I think as we move forward over the next year or so, mild hybrid will become normal on the ICE engines, the internal combustion engines, because it just allows the manufacturers to squeeze a little better fuel consumption out of each of those vehicles. And it's a relatively simple way of doing that, albeit rather expensive for the manufacturers because there's that much extra technology on each of those vehicles. But what this is showing is that petrol and diesel market share is declining, and BEV is rising. So BEV share rose to 5.3% in September year to date, which is amazing, with 21,903 BEV sold. And as more battery electric vehicles become available on the market, with new launches such as the Skoda Enyaq coming out shortly, and updates to the rest of the ranges, like the Hyundai, Kia, even the new Jaguar is looking at, and we're perhaps looking to the future for more battery electric vehicles to become available in higher numbers. We'll see those figures rising even further. If we now look at the used markets, and by this I start looking at both wholesale and resale data, we can see some significant trends starting to manifest in the UK market. So first of all, I'm using here some of our residual value intelligence data that we look at across Europe. And this is amazing news for the UK market. And this is looking at European retail price as an index from 100% around the start of February. Running all the way through the lockdown in each of the separate markets, and then up until this week, really. And actually, the UK in red is stripping ahead of the rest of our European counterparts. But as you can see, most of the big five have actually recovered just about versus where they were at the start of their lockdowns. So it's really positive news for the used market, and this includes both car and vans. Looking at the price index by age and how that's improved. This is just UK market. The black line is all the 105.7 where we are today, and that showed on the previous graph. But it's the older cars that are increasing more rapidly, where demand in those typical part exchange vehicles is starting to really increase. Now that's because new car sales has dipped significantly, so the supply of those older cars has been less prevalent. But that said, even the newer cars, the 0 to 6 months and the 7 to 17 months, have also increased away from where we were at the beginning of lockdown, which is amazing news for the marketplace. In terms of retail stock, I've looked at both cars and LCVs on this graph, just as a way of showing how the market has changed, and perhaps the stock position has changed over time. At the start of lockdown, for both for cars, we're about 60 days on average that it would take to sell a vehicle, and for LCVs, they're around 78 days. This rose significantly to way over 100 for LCVs and just over 100 days for cars. But on both measures, since lockdown ended, the stock position and the days to sell a vehicle has really accelerated. Again, it's because stock is at a premium, and this is why the values in wholesale are starting to increase significantly, particularly for LCVs. And just our usual look at the fastest selling vehicles in September. Mini Roadster actually remains number one, strangely. Average days to sell just 19. Mazda MX-5. The value proposition this month is a Citroen Zaro Picasso, taking just 20 days. But then two further sort of fun and sort of maybe reward vehicles, the Audi A3 convertible and Peugeot RCZ, both rapidly selling, and again, in terms of their average ages, not actually that old. So in this chart, we usually see some real value propositions coming through. Frequently, things like the Dacia Sandero Stepway, but over the last few months, there have been some reward vehicles, I'd like to call them, where perhaps in the second-hand market, you may be sort of saying, well, actually, I want something really fun right now. And a lot of customers are rewarding themselves with, well, in this case, convertibles in September being fastest sellers. It's pretty unheard of. So actually some really interesting news there. If I move to the wholesale markets now, and the top graph is for car, the bottom graph is for LCV, and this just looks at the volumes that we're starting to see through wholesale. Now, these are based on basically without a BCA, but it's an indicative look at what is available and how the volumes have increased over time. And as we can see, for both car and for LCV, they've recovered to pre-lockdown levels. And actually we're performing higher than 2019 in terms of volume that's being sold. The market price performance, again, for both the car and LCV, car at the top, LCV at the bottom. This is looking at the price difference, the percentage difference for current year or current month and versus the previous year month. So both are significantly higher. For LCVs, 45.5% higher than September 2019, just so much higher. And we're seeing in the LCV market, this is because people are looking for pretty much retail-ready vehicles, and they're willing to pay significant premiums, certainly above last year, and the same is true in the car market. The cars that are available are just selling very quickly. Now, in the car market, we're starting to see this slow down ever so slightly, and so likely for November, the values may have reached a peak in October and start to go down ever so slightly in November. But for the LCV market, we're still looking at data coming in for October, and it's still accelerating away for those best examples that are available at auction. A really interesting time that the two different sectors are diverging slightly away from each other. In terms of first-time conversion, although slightly down from the heady peaks of July, where car was 86.4, and for car was 91.1, the first-time conversion remains very, very high in the market. So some real positives, but again, it suggests that the stock that is usually available, certainly through the last few months, hasn't been quite as available as usual. Now, what we're seeing in the car market, because there were a significant number of new car registrations in September, is that supply in the used car market is becoming higher. So buyers at auction and remarketing companies are looking for the best examples, so that they are starting to be a little bit picky, which is starting to see values just decline ever so slightly. Now, at this point, I'm just going to switch to a few examples of what we're looking at in terms of our accuracy. Now, this is from our Tableau system, and it's a live website, and we publish this data on our website each month just to show where we are with our accuracy. And I wanted to highlight this because what we're seeing is that actually our trade accuracy in September was within 0.7% of the market, which is amazing, and compared to sort of how the market has been reacting over the last few months. We aren't as accurate on LCV, and I can take that because the market has just accelerated it away significantly. But where we are different from maybe some of our other data suppliers is that we actually look at the retail market as well, and we can see using the retail values alongside our trade values that we can be very close to the market as we move forward. Now, to answer some questions that came out after the last webinar that I ran, we started to talk about how glasses set RVs. Now, one of the questions was specifically about LCVs, but actually how we do it is very similar across the two vehicle types. So first of all, I'll go through kind of the process that we have, just as a bit of an aside away from the usual run-of-the-mill data that we run through. So we look at vehicles in different ways, and LCVs is quite nice because this year, as with many in the last few, the DFT have run a survey, and this survey actually gives us a really good pointers of how the vehicle's being used, indicating the primary usage, and in this case the primary usage of vans, it was for carrying equipment, tools and material. 41% of users use that, followed by the delivery and collection of goods. Now, I believe over the next year or so, the delivery and collection of goods will increase quite significantly because we're seeing so much more home delivery than ever before. Now, one of the biggest figures, and I think this is through my experience both with Volkswagen commercial vehicles and at Renault, looking at the way vehicles are used and how far away from base they travel each day is really key. Now, half of all vans, that's 50% in Great Britain, stayed local to their base within 15 miles of their base on a typical day. Not a COVID day, not a lockdown day, but a typical day, they will only go around 15 miles. Now, this is amazing. And I'm saying that because as we move forward to electric vans, and I'm saying LCVs here, so I'm talking the car-derived type van and the larger kind of traffic, and then upwards to the large master type van. 15 miles from base would more than be covered by the current battery technology. So if you are okay at home to be able to charge that vehicle, then or a base, then it suddenly becomes a perfect choice. So as we move forward and really start looking at residual values for electric vans, it becomes quite obvious that actually battery range, although looking at the range and it only saying 100 miles may give people palpitations still, but if they're only going 15 miles from base, then actually that range will cover them, more than cover them, in terms of where they're going. So over half of businesses owned vans which we knew. That's quite interesting. 34% were owned outright, and then 21% via some kind of hire purchase agreement. And so again, the penetration of finance is still very high within the van business. Most privately owned vans were second-hand. I think we know that anyway. That's why certainly today for the small businesses, they tend to go to auction or go to a trader to buy their van. They wouldn't go to a new dealer unless maybe they'd had a windfall of amazing investment in their business, so they could afford a brand new van. But that's quite interesting as well. So the most common primary usage of ultra low emission vans, those are under 50 grams per kilometre, is carrying equipment, tools and materials. So again, they're the kind of vans that maybe are doing repairs, they're painter and decorator type vehicles, and those users have actually already become used to using perhaps the lower range because actually they don't travel any further each day. So that's also quite interesting. So the penetration there is following the usage of the van driver staying very local on a typical day. So how do we determine RVs? Well, when we publish an RV forecast, we will examine what's happened in the past on a model range. We'll look to the future of predictions of performance and maybe how many of those vehicles there will be selling in the marketplace. We'll also look at shared technology. It happens much more in LCVs than perhaps in cars, but we'll look at who's related to who. So perhaps we could look at in years gone past, the original Crafter was based on the Sprinter. Now the Crafter is built in its own factory in Poznan in Poland, but now shares with the MAN TGE. So there's lots of relationships to take into account in the LCV business, more so than we would normally see in cars. Although that is changing. Certainly within Volkswagen Group, we can see the Citigo, the Me and the Up are identical vehicles, and we may see as we move through this year, perhaps more sharing coming out between some of the Japanese manufacturers. but we'll see that as time goes by. We will take effects of, we'll look at mileage, we'll look at plate effects, so that when we change in March and September and how that affects the residual values. We'll look at the manufacturer vehicle life cycles and how the manufacturer is predicting when the change points would be, with the possibilities of upgrades to that vehicle. We will look at brand perception, and the overall brand opinion as well is also very important as we set residual values. And it's very important, especially when there are shared platforms. We can see that today with the Renault and the Renault and the Mercedes-Benz Citan. So that's an interesting juxtaposition between those two, and understanding quite what the brand pull is between those two particular LCVs. We'll also look a little bit at customer satisfaction and how that affects demand in the future, because brand perception may be relatively low for a brand, but customer satisfaction may be relatively high. So again, those kind of reviews and customer input can really make a difference to the residual value and how much a used LCV buyer will pay for a particular vehicle. We don't actually make any specific adjustments on the vehicle usage. That would be down to our data user, the dealers, the finance companies, whoever may be using our data to actually make those final adjustments themselves. Obviously, if the vehicle has been used for a use that maybe makes the vehicle smell, maybe it's a fish pickup, then perhaps the RV and the trading value of that would be significantly lower than something that was being used to transport polystyrene that doesn't have any specific smell. How we manage LCV RVs is quite, it's actually quite complicated. Often people look to the LCV market as being much more simple than the car, but actually, because there are so many more derivatives available in each model range, it can actually be much more complicated. But what we have to do as a data provider is to create a mutual opinion. We will benchmark competitors just as you, our customers, do, but also our competitors do. But we'll also look at data availability when it's available, what the CO2 is, what the fuel consumption, what the range is of the EV. We'll also look at across segments and also across the brands to make sure that we aren't, just check where we are in the marketplace and how we can make sure that we sort of ensure that we're giving a fair judgment to each vehicle and each model. And also, what's the second life of this vehicle going to be? The first life will really, really hurt some vehicles too much that their second life is very limited. And also, what is the specification on that vehicle to actually generate a second life? Volkswagen Transporter has also always been a sort of premium looking vehicle, but actually has a second life because so many people like to convert that vehicle. The same is becoming true of the right vehicles with the right specification. And when I talk about the right specification on that first life, it's things like air conditioning, possibly automatic gearbox. As more automatics become available in LCV, they're becoming much more important too, because they're giving the second life, the second owner, much more choice. So we just got to make sure we continue to look at those kinds of things. Okay. But there are other influences. Now, celebrity endorsements aren't really one of them, but I thought I'd put that picture in anyway, because Chuck Norris with his Fiat vans was actually quite amusing. But back to the point, legislation will drive residual values. And at the moment, it's not actually often that British and European politicians actually agree on something. But actually, there's an underlying belief that we need to switch to much lower emitting vehicles. And the current legislation is driving OEMs to develop some kind of electrification at speed, whether that's plug-in hybrids or full battery electric vehicles, both in car and LCV world. This is really forcing the hand, really, and that we need to look at reducing CO2. The other thing is, particularly in the UK, the Road to Zero strategy. This is an ambition where at least 50% and potentially as many as 70% of new car sales and vans will be ultra low emission by, all new car sales and up to 40% of new vans by 2030. So it's a real push forward to actually make that happen. And it's down to us as members of the automotive industry to really look at ways of making this happen more quickly. And it will be both through of education, but also understanding how we can support the launch of these vehicles much more often as we move forward. And of course, emission zones. The London ULEZ came to fruition just last year, but a number of others have been delayed or even cancelled by COVID. I think they will come back because this was driving values of Euro 5 LCVs down significantly. At the moment, Euro 5 LCVs are actually in demand again. So we'll see what happens over the next year or so as COVID gets under control, hopefully, and we'll see what some of the city centres start to do around lower emission zones, but it's going to be interesting as we move forward. So in summary, really, the marketplaces have been on fire over the last few months. Certainly the car market is perhaps coming to a plateau as we move forward, and we're seeing that in retail and in wholesale. So that's going to be quite interesting because more stock is becoming available. For LCV, there is still some increases going to be happening as we move through October and into November, because there's still a demand out there. There isn't enough stock really to go around, and hence sort of the values are going up that we're seeing at auction and in through our remarketing channels. We're seeing stock days come down because there's so much demand, and whilst we sort of continue to monitor the markets, it's just important to bear in mind how we will continue to set our RVs moving forward. Okay, thanks a lot. I think it's only 11:34. We've got time for a few questions, and it looks like we've had a few over the last few minutes. Let me just have a look on new car. One question that's come through: are new car prices increasing given the continuing prevalence of PCP? And what is the average retail price by segment? I'm not sure I can answer that one straight away, but in terms of new car prices over the last few years, they have continued to increase. Now, some of that has been driven by the euro-pound exchange, and some of it's been driven by additional technology on the new cars. Now, we talked briefly around the mild hybrid being added to most internal combustion engines, and that will increase, but there is a significant cost there for the manufacturers, and although they lower their CO2, which may be good for the CAFE targets, where the manufacturers have to hit specific targets for their vehicles, I don't think they can be expected to foot the complete bill of all of those vehicles hitting the market. So there will continue to be some price increases. I'm not sure PCP is actually increasing the prices that much, although PCP does allow buyers or customers to get into a new car much more easily. I don't see that as being a significant sort of increase, sort of significant force to be reckoned with for increasing prices. In terms of the second part of the question, perhaps we can look at average car increases, average retail prices in the next webinar. Maybe I can do some graphs on that so we can see how prices have changed over time. But thank you very much for that question. Just to finish off, we have our residual value intelligence tool. And as I've said before, Tim and Paul are very willing to take you through this tool. But if I just go back into where we are at the moment, our RVI is a tool that we're using to monitor COVID and what's happening in COVID quite a lot. And this was the chart I showed you before, where the UK has accelerated away from the other four big European markets. And this tool is quite nice because it allows you to look at what's happening in the market and what's happening in your market over time. So that's difficult, isn't it? It doesn't want to change for me. Excellent. Let me just sign in. Is it going to work for me? Oh, how typical. Anyway, well, the other news I can tell you, because I don't think that's going to work straight away. Never mind, we'll try that again next month. Some good news from our marketing department. Ben has asked me to take you through just to show you a couple of pages from our new website, which will be launching at the start of November, around the start of November. So what we've got here is an update, and it should be an easier way to get to all of our data. Now, for customers who are customers today, they will be able to log into their subscriptions in just the same way as they do today. The idea of the website is to get the messages out that we have, how we work in the UK, how we use retail, and how we use wholesale data to create the best possible valuations across the valuation, the piece, but actually to present our other data sets that include SMR data, that include vehicle identification and specification data. So we have around 9 main data sets that we can sell to customers in quite a nice way, and we can present this on our new website. One of the other places that perhaps you'd be interested in would be to come to the news and insight area on the website. We will promote both European and UK news on this part of the website, and this is news that's written by my team on a regular basis to talk about what's happening in the market, both from an LCV perspective and from a car perspective. But we'll also look at some of our older data sets, including the motorhomes and caravan data, and we'll look at motorcycles as well, because that's one of our main data sets moving forward. But we also have some interesting blog pieces that will talk about what's happening specifically around some of the more newer vehicles that are available. In this case, it was the Mach-E from Ford, the Mustang Mach-E, which is an excellent electric vehicle coming to the market at just the right time, which will really help Ford's penetration into electrification. We talk a lot about how SUVs have grown significantly, but actually this is a nice piece about potentially SUVs being a victim of our own success. So on this part of the website, we tend to have between sort of 5 and 10 stories a month, just to add those through. Some are blog pieces, some are more editorial pieces. But of course, we will be having a newsletter that will run alongside the Auto Vista newsletter, so that you can stay as up to date as possible with Glasses data. That's all I have for this month. Sorry, the RVI login didn't quite work, but as I said, Tim and Paul are available to take calls, and you can request a free demo to have a look at our data. You can also, once I've made this into a PDF, you'll be able to download our latest COVID-19 impact white paper here. For the UK, the impact certainly this year has really slowed. You can see our prices, our values, and certainly in terms of our RV forecast, will be sort of just about where we are. I think as we head into October, there'll be some fallout from the end of the furlough scheme, the continuation of the job retention scheme, and how that really works for the market. But certainly for this year, it's looking quite promising at the moment for the values. Perhaps next year when we'll see a bit of a drop, but at the moment it seems relatively positive. So for now, I'd like to say thank you very much for your attention. And hope to be able to speak to you again this time next month. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.